and any other speaker, when they come forward, to please introduce themselves when speaking. Let's start with you, Sarah.
Sarah Williams, Cabinet Member for Housing and Planning and Deputy Leader.
Councillor Donna Carlin, Cabinet Lead for Finance and Corporate Services.
Mike Carter, Climate Action, Environment and Transport.
Lucia Desnerves, Cabinet Member for Health, Social Care and Wellbeing.
Councillor Seema Chandwani, Cabinet Member for Resident Services and Tackling Inequality.
Councillor Ruth Gordon, Cabinet Member for Placemaking and the Local Economy.
Councillor Ajda Ovac, Cabinet Member for Communities.
Zina Brabazon, Cabinet Member Children, Schools and Families.
And I'm Emily Arkell, and I'm the Cabinet Lead for Culture and Leisure.
Thank you all. Do we have any apologies tonight?
None received.
Thank you, Richard. Item 3, urgent business. The Overview and Scrutiny Committee decided at its meeting of the 14th of January 2025 to refer the decision taken by Cabinet on the 10th of December on the borough-wide PSPO back to us for reconsideration. According to the call-in procedure in the Council's Constitution, this is Part 4, Section H, we have 5 working days to reconsider the key decision before taking a final decision. And therefore, I have accepted this matter as an item of late urgent business to be considered with item 8 on the agenda to meet this requirement. Item 4, do any Cabinet members have declarations of interest to make? No declarations of interest. Item 5, which is the notice of intention to conduct business in private, any representations received and the response to any such representations. There were no representations received at the agenda publication stage in relation to the exempt items on the agenda. Item 6, minutes. Can we just confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of December as a correct record? Item 7, deputations, petitions and questions. None were received. Item 8, matters referred to Cabinet by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As I outlined at item 3, and just before Councillor White introduces the OSC call-in report on the implementation of a borough-wide PSPO, I will also set out the process for how this report and recommendations will be considered and the decisions that Cabinet will take, so all attendees are clear on the process. Cabinet will firstly consider the recommendations of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee from the call-in meeting. These will be outlined by Councillor White and are set out in the supplementary pack of papers at page 7. And then I will ask Councillor Ovac, who's the Cabinet Member for Communities, to provide a verbal response to the scrutiny recommendations. After Councillor Ovac's response, we will then move to reconsideration of the key decision on the borough-wide PSPO. And at this point, I will take questions from Cabinet members and then from all other councillors that have indicated asking a question. Please, can I ask Councillor White to come forward and report on the outcome of the OSC meeting, which considered the call-in of Cabinet decision of the borough-wide PSPO. So when you're ready, Councillor White, you have 5 minutes to lay out your recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. So the OSC met a week ago to consider the call-in that was submitted. And as well as hearing from the call-in signatories from the Cabinet Member, from service officers, we also received a deputation that was led by John Glackin from Streets Kitchen, an organisation that works with street homeless rough sleepers in the borough and elsewhere. I would say that committee members were particularly struck by Mr Glackin's concerns over the exemption for the way it's framed is for verified homeless sleepers. He pointed out how difficult it was to get street homeless individuals to engage with anyone that they see as being in a position of authority, and that includes outreach workers. And he told us that having a PSPO in place makes rough sleepers less likely to engage and therefore less likely to gain the verified status that would give them that exemption. So that feeds into our recommendation 1, which is about widening the exemption so that it includes all rough sleepers and not just those with the status of verified. That is also connected to our third recommendation, which is about seeking evidence that the ASB team will be working in a kind of lockstep with the homelessness outreach team and the public health team. So we've got a coordinated approach. And finally, committee members had concerns about further penalising public urination in the context of a severe shortage of public toilet facilities, and felt that implementing this kind of punitive approach before developing the forthcoming toilet strategy was kind of putting the cart before the horse, and posed a risk of effectively further penalising people who might just be caught short and left with no other option than to look for the most discreet way to relieve themselves. What I would like to say before I finish is that not all committee members felt that those concerns, even though they shared those concerns, they didn't feel that there were members of the committee who didn't feel that they warranted referring it back, and felt that a preferable approach would have been to allow the decision to stand, express the concerns to Cabinet, and keep a very close eye on it through the relevant scrutiny panel. However, a majority of committee members did want to refer the decision back. So here I am with my report, and it's 3 recommendations for Cabinet to respond to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor White. If I can ask CouncillorOvat to please provide her response.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor White, for presenting the call-in and the 3 scrutiny recommendations. The reason we brought this to Cabinet is that the Council receives, on average, just over 700 ASB reports per month. Over 65% of reports dealt with by the ASB enforcement team relate to misuse of public spaces. As an elective representative, we cannot ignore these numbers, and we cannot ignore the requests by constituents to help address this. We cannot look constituents in the eye and say we cannot do anything. Something needs to be done. ASB is a priority of mine, and I am sure a priority of yours as elected representatives. This aligns with our manifesto commitment, which secured the mandate to create safer, more inclusive spaces across the borough. A borough-wide PSPO represents a significant opportunity for the Council to enhance public safety, protect residents, improve the local environment, address antisocial behaviour, and contribute to a better quality of life for people impacted. I'm well aware that PSPOs are not the only answer to resolving ASB, but they are one of the tools that the Council can utilise to deal with nuisance or recurring problems that are detrimental to the local community's quality of life. I wanted to highlight that the Monitoring Officer and the Chief Finance Section 151 Officer were of the view that the implementation of a borough-wide PSPO is within the budget and policy framework. I will now respond in more detail on each of the 3 recommendations. In terms of the verification of rough sleepers, the reason we verify is so we can address the needs of individuals, so we can provide the support they need and refer them to the right services. I'll hand over now to my Cabinet colleague for Housing and Planning, who can go into more detail.
Thank you, Councillor Ovat, and thank you, Councillor White, for coming to us with this evening. So verification is a key way of ensuring that we can identify those who are genuinely homeless and therefore exempt from the PSPO powers. We understand that needs are complex and not everyone will want to share their details with a public body like the Council, Police and Home Office, but through the CHAIN chain system, we can also anonymise referrals, removing a barrier to those who are undocumented or have reservations about sharing their data. Information held on chain is only available to carefully selected organisations and workers who really need to see it. These include outreach teams, No Second Night Out, hostels, day centres and some health services. Verification processes rely on collaboration with outreach services, which already maintain records and engage regularly with rough sleepers. This partnership ensures decisions are based on factual, compassionate assessments rather than assumptions. The Council has an existing protocol between the Community Safety Team, the Homeless Outreach Team and Recycling, Waste and Enforcement, designed to protect and support our homeless residents. At the call-in, I know there was discussion about neighbouring boroughs and best practice, and these policies are in line with the approach of our neighbours, including Islington and Hackney, who both have PSPOs in force. And we already have a tri-borough partnership with them. Homeless individuals are explicitly exempt from enforcement for behaviours such as public urination when they have no reasonable alternative. And to be clear, we have never and will never fine anyone for their circumstances. I hope that provides some reassurance to the committee.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. And for these reasons, Cabinet is recommended to reject this recommendation. In response to the second recommendation on public urination and defecation, I am pleased a toilet strategy is being developed, which we are looking to complete this year. However, we are limited in resources as a council, so the strategy will not roll out provision across the borough in the short term, and so should not hold up the implementation of the PSPO. The main drivers for the toilet strategy are reducing isolation in older people and others with specific needs. Reducing public urination has not been a major driver for this work. We are pleased that the Mayor of London and TfL are investing in toilet facilities in South Tottenham, White Hart Lane and Seven Sisters stations in Haringey. As a council, we are also investing in new public toilets at Bruce Grove, which are due to open this year. The recommendation conflates two things and the drivers are separate. Where there is toilet provision, public urination still occurs, for instance, at football games in the borough, where despite urinals being provided, it is still an issue residents raise to us. The borough does have a range of publicly accessible toilets, as illustrated in the call-in response, which provide toilet options throughout the borough. The PSPO makes provision for exemption from enforcement action where there is good reason. As outlined to the OSC, the PSPO is intended to challenge behaviours, not individuals, and act as a behaviour change tool for habitual offenders. Considering this, it is not necessary for the Council to delay the introduction of the PSPO until the toilet strategy is implemented. For these reasons, Cabinet is recommended to reject this recommendation. On the third recommendation, I am pleased to say that we have a joint approach within the Council to support people experiencing rough sleeping, community safety and public health initiatives. Community safety colleagues also attend the Homelessness Reduction Board with other key partners, including Public Health and the Homelessness Outreach Team. This board oversees the development and implementation of the Haringey Homelessness Strategy to ensure that through effective partnership work, homelessness is prevented and reduced. The Council is a key stakeholder in the delivery of a multi-agency approach to responding to homelessness via the Partner Problem Solving Group, PPSG, which is attended by internal partners across the Council, police and external partners as and when required. We have developed our drug and alcohol services for people experiencing rough sleeping, and these services can be accessed in a number of ways, including at Mulberry Junction. Between 2023 and 2024, we increased the proportion of people experiencing rough sleeping who were referred into drugs and alcohol support, who then went on to engage with the service from 62% of those referred to 79% of those referred for men, and from 48% to 83% for women who were referred. These improved outcomes evidence the impact our successful joint working is having in supporting some of our most vulnerable residents. For these reasons, Cabinet is recommended to reject the OSC recommendation. In conclusion, I have responded to each of these recommendations. I urge Cabinet now adopt the original Cabinet report of 10th December. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Over. If I can turn to Cabinet colleagues, do any of you firstly have any questions on the scrutiny report for Councillor White? No questions. Secondly, do any Cabinet members have questions for Councillor Over on her response to the scrutiny recommendations? Councillor Arkell.
Thank you. I've just got a very quick question just to ask about the consultation which took part as part of this engagement and what changes were made as a result of the feedback you got in that engagement and the consultation process.
Thank you, Councillor Arkell, for your question. Our approach to consultation has been extensive and rooted in the principles of the Haringey Deal. We wanted to ensure we gathered a broad range of feedback. We actively co-designed and collaborated with residents and stakeholders. There was a co-design phase in January 2024 to identify priority areas. There was a 19-week consultation process from March to August 2024. Feedback was gathered from over 200 groups, services and organisations, 46 public engagements, events across the borough, 56 community setting questionnaires. The council received over 1,700 questionnaire responses and around 900 detailed comments, representing diverse perspectives across Haringey. Based on the consultation feedback and legal policy and finance advice, we amended the proposed prohibitions to better reflect our community's needs. For example, stronger safeguards with the condition of no on-the-spot fines and exemptions for vulnerable groups such as children and disabled people. We then brought this to a public cabinet meeting on the 10th of December, but just to note that we didn't have any representations at that meeting.
Thank you. So if we can now move to the reconsideration of the decision. So in accordance with the call-in procedure, having heard the responses to the scrutiny recommendations and discussion, our Cabinet happy to agree to confirm its original decisions made on the 10th of December 2024 as set out at pages 49 and 50. Agreed. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor White.
Thank you.
If we can move to item 9, which is the award of contract following tender of school improvement and governor support services. Councillor Brabazon.
Thank you, Councillor. This is a pretty straightforward report, which is seeking approval from colleagues to award a contract for the ongoing provision of school improvement and governor services. This is a service that we have had in place since 2018, and this contract is now once again up for renewal. Quite simply, school improvement and governance is obviously pivotal to ensuring high performance in our schools, and the Haringey is currently delivering school improvement through a schools company and in accordance with the Education Act 1996, but the contract currently will expire in March 2025. We need to sustain these services to schools, and in June 2024, Cabinet agreed for an option to proceed to open tender so that we are in compliance with schools company regulations. The report sets out the key elements of the tender and the proposed contract, including a series of strengthened and expanded key performance indicators to ensure our schools are supported, but also challenged in their work to raise pupil attainment and ensure they are delivering the best outcomes from children and young people. Of course, I would like to say that our schools are 98% good and outstanding. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that reminder, Councillor Brabazon. Any questions from Cabinet members? No? Councillor Emery.
Thank you, Chair. So 3 questions on this one. First off, are you concerned that there's only one bidder to come forward? Second question, the scoring in 6.1 is not presented with a maximum score. Just for reference, we'd just like to know what these marks are out of in section 6.1. And then the last one, KPI 4 and KPI 8 mentioned the term global majority. Leaving aside any desirability of using the term, could you define it in this case? For what purposes does the monitoring include? Does it include non-white British groups, white Irish, Polish? Would it include stuff like Turkish Cypriot, for instance, or anything like that?
Could you just repeat the third question?
Yeah, KPI 4 and KPI 8 mentioned the term global majority. Just wondering how you define that term.
I'm going to answer the first question, which I think is very straightforward. Although, of course, I've got Anne next to me, and she'll no doubt be able to expand more. And I might pass over 2 questions to the officers, a bit more technical. But why was there only one bidder? This is a very niche market, and school improvement. It was put out to open tender, so the schools companies across London or the country, effectively school improvement bodies could apply, but they chose not to. So it was an open tender. The scoring, I don't know what the marks were out of, so I'll have to ask the officers for that. Global majority usually, I think, refers to people with ethnic minority. I think it's just a way of describing it, which is a bit more it represents what's going on in the world, but I'll pass over to the officers.
Thank you for your question. I don't have the precise detail with me today, and so if it's okay, Chair, we can provide a written answer to that response. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. So we will return to the resolutions after considering the exempt information at item 22 on this item. So if we can move to item 10, which is to increase parking permit charges for car club schemes. Councillor Hakata.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is a proposal to increase the permit charges for car clubs in the borough. At present, we are in the lowest 20th percentile in terms of charges in London. And we believe that considering the large revenue profits that the providers make, especially at the moment we have one main provider, that we increase the charges so that they are in the middle range for London. So that's the first aspect of this. And the other one is to also open the market up and have multiple, open it up with a pilot to enable smaller providers to enter the market as well. Any questions? Happy to take them.
Thank you. Any questions for Councillor Hakata? Councillor Dusnevs.
Just wondered if you could say a little bit more about presumably increasing the price we don't feel will hamper the use of car clubs currently in the borough, and if you could say a little bit more about how it could, how we hope it might expand usage and the role of the larger providers versus smaller.
Okay, thank you. So just on a basic level, we are our main purpose of raising them is essentially to bring us more in line. So at the moment, I mean, we've got boroughs that are charging several £100 more annually per space than us, and have no impact on the service provision. In terms of the smaller providers, one of the significant barriers to entry is essentially you've got a huge amount of hardware that you've got to invest in. So it means that London, specifically Haringey, has sort of turned into a monopoly because of the massive market share of one provider. However, by putting a separate plot, if you like, in the tender for smaller providers for five vehicles, means that they don't have that substantial amount, but it'll enable competition into the local market. I don't know if Maurice or anyone wants to add. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Chair. Maurice Richards, Head of Transport and Travel. So what we've looked at across London is that Councillor Carter's right, we're in the low 20 percentile in terms of our charges. How we encourage other providers to come into the market is by including all infrastructure costs, such as TMOs, in terms of the price we charge for the permit. So instead of having a separate cost for monitoring, a separate cost for permits, and a separate cost for the infrastructure in terms of TMO, we're now including that in the charge, which is a one-off charge. So there's less barrier to actually entering the market. In terms of our costs, it will bring us towards the middle, and I think we'll still remain very competitive across London. Some of our neighbouring boroughs, including Barnet, is charging far more than us, and we also have what we'll say a really good setup in terms of the number of car-free developments we have in the borough. So there is some subsidy in terms of developers where they need to actually provide some contribution towards the car club providers.
Thank you, Maurice. Councillor Jamwani.
Hi, Councillor Hakata. Can I just ask, do we know, and just a ballpark, I don't want you to share their figures, but do we know how much these companies are making from us? Because at the moment, if I was to run a private hire company, I would have to purchase a property, have a forecourt, or have a garage and where people come and pick it up. But it sounds like I didn't need to do any of that. I could have just had a car parking space for really cheap and saved myself from overhead. So how much do we know how much business these companies are getting from our residents?
Great question. So one of the main provider, Zipcar in the borough, generates revenue of 1.4 million a year. So the increase in permit charges would take an additional £50,000 off that revenue. So we're talking a minor dent. So in other words, we feel that this will maintain the commercial viability for them. So it's not a disincentive. And in terms of our curbside space, this is what, the curbside space in the borough, we're working on a curbside strategy that will sort of show us exactly how much real estate is being taken up. But what we do know, I believe, is generally per square metre, we're talking about £50 per square metre of that curbside space. So again, it's actually prime real estate, as you've said, and we believe that we need to essentially charge a little bit more to equalise the amount of profit that has been taken from that very expensive space that's used to essentially park a metal box.
Any more questions? Okay, so if we can move to the resolution, which is to agree the resolutions.
Sorry, Chair. My question.
Apologies, rushing. Go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. The first one is just on the idea of the report. It notes that the existing contracts are allowed to lapse, and a re-tendering exercise last year resulted in no bidders. By increasing these fees, is it the council's contention that a successful re-tendering exercise can be undertaken? And then the second part is, I'll do that in part. The other one is to do with the rise in fees. So, part of the justification, as you mentioned to Councillor Das-Neves, was about the trying to match other areas. But the new ICE vehicle charge looks comparable, but the EV and fixed bays look significantly higher than other areas. Is this not quite disappointing when we're looking at making a dent in carbon? I'd also say that the fees are going up in one lump rather than a staggered amount, which is obviously quite a sharp change.
I mean, so I'll pass on to Maurice to go into the detail, but one of the key aspects of this, one of the strengths of this tender is that, as Maurice mentioned before, we are rationalising all the charges. So whereas in other boroughs you charge for TMOs, you charge for permits, you charge for additional things, here we're putting it all into one package. So actually it's going to be really easy and streamlined, but Maurice can go into more details.
Thanks, Councillor. Through your chair. So one of the reasons for the failed tender last year is exactly that. We had different charges. So we had a charge for monitoring and we had a charge for TMO and there's a charge for permit. We did extensive aftermarket testing, spoke to all the providers and asked them, why didn't you apply? And they said pretty much we are prepared to pay a higher permit cost, but we don't want to start paying separate costs in terms of a monitoring, because then everybody in the council will be setting separate monitoring charge. So what we did as a council is that we went away and did a benchmarking exercise where we collected information from Como UK and all the other neighbouring providers all across London and look at what exactly are they charging. So what we found out is that we were in the bottom 20th percentile in terms of our fixed base. So, I mean, for comparison, some councils were charging 1,200, 1,400 fixed bay. We were charging 200. What we've done is that, based on all the analysis we've done, we've set those prices in the middle, so we haven't gone to the extreme high, because if you look at some of our existing research in terms of our flex for what was the internal combustion engine, we were pretty much quite high. So we only got it by £100 there. It was £1,400. But again, in terms of our curbside, each metre of curbside in Haringey now has a value. And this is a commercial entity who is using our infrastructure to make significant amount of money. So in terms of their turnover, the fixed base for 2022 was 1.4 million in Haringey. In 2023, again, it's 1.4 million for the fixed, and the floating, it was 900,000. So in terms of what we're talking about in increase in charges overall, we're talking between 80 and 150K in terms of increased charges, and some of that money is being put back into TMO and expansion of the car clubs. So I haven't got the profits, but in terms of, it's a small amount of money in terms of their turnover that we're asking for, which needs to be reinvested in the scheme for expansion, and then it drives our ambition in terms of having a low carbon borough. In terms of each car club is estimated to take between 14 and 30 vehicles off the road. So we are investing that money back into the system, but what we're doing is streamlining it where we're not charging multiple charges, which was one of the reasons for the failed tender.
Thank you, Maurice. So we can move to the resolution, which is to agree the resolutions are set out in 3.1 to 3.5 of the report. This is contained on page 50 and 51 of the agenda. Do we all agree? Agree. Thank you. Item 11, which is approval to procure home care, family support and family therapeutic support services via dynamic purchasing service for children's services. Councillor Brabazon.
Thank you. This report is not about the services themselves, it's about the process for procuring the services, and is simply seeking authority from Cabinet to undertake a procurement exercise for these services, which will support families with children aged 0 to 18 with various health and complex needs, and also therapeutic support to families to reduce any violence, crime, antisocial behaviour and so on within the family. We are committed to supporting families to care for their children and young people with complex needs in the home. And some of this work is very specialised and complex and requires specialist agencies. So the commissioning which is proposed to be undertaken is for that purpose and will be done through dynamic purchasing system in order to be fair, equitable and transparent. And I would ask Cabinet to authorise this approach. I would like to say also there is a significant focus on accountability and quality standards through the Children's Commissioning team, which is getting very experienced in robust negotiation and contract monitoring. And this is an essential element of commissioning and vital to ensure families receive high quality services. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brabazon. Any questions on this from the Cabinet? No. Okay. Councillor Emery.
Thank you, Chair. 3 questions. Firstly, the report estimates the total cost of the service this year as being 1.8 million and the cost over 4 years as being 7.2. Just wondering why there's no calculation involving inflation there. The second question, no responses were received in Haringey's consultation with families. Was extending the length of the consultation or engaging directly with these families considered? And how has the lack of response affected the contract which is being tendered? And then the third question, many care providers with thin profit margins have raised concerns around the ongoing viability following the increase in employers' national insurance in the budget, and Haringey's quite rightly admirable commitment to paying the London living wage. But this is going to obviously limit the pool of providers that can bid for council services to the council. Given this backdrop, are there any concerns about receiving bids for these lots, especially with the council's stated aim of reducing the hourly rate paid to the winning provider?
I'm going to ask the officers to respond to those questions.
We have our Officer Pretty here to respond to the technical questions. Thank you, Pretty.
I might have to go back on some of those questions. So in terms of the way that the DPS works, is that providers, it's almost like an individual competition. So each opportunity is advertised and then bidders have the opportunity to respond to that, ensuring that we are getting best value for money, whilst also ensuring that the bidder is responding for that individual's needs. So it's about meeting that individual's needs. Sorry, your first question was around?
1.8 million, and obviously over 4 years this has been shown to be 7.2 million in the books. It doesn't look like there's any inflation costs in there.
Yeah, you're right. There isn't any inflation costs. I mean, within the children's market, generally the rates will tend to stay fairly stable. And obviously, if there is a need for us to go back and have a further conversation around inflation with providers, we do scrutinise those costs quite robustly. We do go back to providers asking why they're asking for increases. So we're taking into account already some of the profits that organisations are making.
And on the third one there, just to do with, sorry, the second question to do with the no responses being received from families. Are you at all concerned about that in terms of how it's affected how the contract's been tendered?
So again, on that, in terms of family engagement, there would have been responses factored into the services as they're running currently. So whilst families may not have individually responded to the consultation, we would have taken feedback from social workers and also through experiences of the services that are currently being commissioned. So it's not going out to an individual provider, so the contract won't be awarded to an individual provider. What we're doing by creating a DPS, it's an approved framework, if you like. So we're making it compliant. Providers will come onto that, they'll pass certain quality assurance checks, and then we run a mini competition, like I said, to meet that individual's needs. So it's not one single provider. We have the opportunity to go out to multiple organisations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Priti. Okay, if there's no more questions, if we can move to the resolution on this report, which is to agree the resolutions are set out in 3.1 to 3.4 of the report, and this is on page 60 of the agenda. Do we all agree? Thank you. Okay, so item 12, which is the approval to procure supported accommodation via a dynamic purchasing system for children in care and care leavers. Councillor Brabazon.
Thank you. This is a similar report, but a different aspect of children's services relating to supported accommodation for children in care and care leavers, but again, seeking permission from Cabinet colleagues to enter into a commissioning process to find new providers. And the procurement exercise is again through dynamic purchasing system, so as we've heard, to create the framework whereby we can secure good providers, and this is for a particularly important area, obviously, supported accommodation and services for children in care, that is children we look after, for whom we are the corporate parents, ages 16 to 17, and care leavers aged 18 plus. So I don't really want to repeat what I've said in relation to the commissioning arrangements, but to say that as corporate parent we have a statutory duty to ensure sufficiency of accommodation for our most vulnerable children and young people, and we want to do this in the most transparent and organised manner to secure the best accommodation we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brabazon. Any questions from the Cabinet? No. Okay, Councillor Emery.
Thank you, Chair. 3 questions. Section 1.3, why are costs expected to increase even as the number of children and young people in supported accommodation is expected to fall this year? Then 1.8, why is authority being delegated away from Cabinet to sign off individual calls for contracts? And then lastly, it's on the consultation, which showed that 45% of young people felt that the accommodation was unacceptable. Just wondered if there's any further work being done into this area to find out why this was. Was there a particular provider which was consistently providing poor accommodation?
I'm going to ask Priti to respond to those. If you don't mind, you will appreciate that even if numbers have gone down, costs go up.
So in response to the question about the costs increasing, we are seeing more complex children coming through requiring higher levels of support. So that's where the costs are increasing. We're also demanding a lot more from our providers in terms of the care that they're providing for our children and young people. So in terms of training costs, meeting Ofsted regulations, registration. So that's, we expect to see that the costs will increase in line with that. Sorry, your second question.
Yeah, that's probably one more for the Cabinet member. Is to do with the it being delegated away from Cabinet to sign off individual call-offs, which seems to be a change on 1.8.
Thank you. I think the response is that it's to do with financial regulations below a threshold. It's delegated to the relevant officer, which I think might be me in this case.
Yeah, and then the final question was to do the consultation. Young people finding 45% of the accommodation being unacceptable. Just wondering, is there any specific causes found for that? Any investigation been done?
Sorry, which paragraph are you referring to?
I've got a paragraph that one. I'll have to look back and check, but it says that 45% of young people surveyed found the accommodation provided was unacceptable.
Yes. Without going, I'd have to go back to the detail to find specifically, but sometimes our young people are placed in at Her Majesty's pleasure or His Majesty's pleasure, as it is now, and that sort of thing. And so those might be the reasons why it's unacceptable. It's for those sorts of reasons. It might also be that the young people feel that it's not acceptable, although it is deemed to meet their need. Thank you.
Could I just add as well that the commissioning team undertakes quality assurance visits of the provisions. So we have set out the standards that we're expecting within the specification that will be aligned with the DPS. There's quality assurance checking right at the front of when providers come on board to try and join the DPS. There'll be a visit out to the provision as well. And we've been very clear about the standards that we are expecting for our young people. And where it's deemed through a quality assurance visit that the provider's not meeting the required standards, they're given an action plan to bring their standards up. And if they don't, then the decision is made. Obviously, a report will come back for directors to make a decision about whether we continue to use that provision or not. But the specification is very, very clear about our expectations.
Just like to say, I thought that was a really good question. And I think it's really good that the service has consulted our young people. This is a really difficult area. I know from my own experience as a councillor many years ago, seeing the type of accommodation a young person was placed in. So in the casework. So I do think that it's really good that services asked young people, listen to what they've said, change the specification, because we want them to have a better experience, certainly than that young person had.
And if I may add to that, in another meeting in this building last week, we were informed that young people go on the visits to do the quality assurance, so we get their voice through that route too. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So if we can move to agree the resolutions as set out in 3.1 to 3.3 of the report, and this is on pages 80 and 81. Do we all agree? Agree. Thank you, Priti. Item 13, which is the award of contracts for planned investment programme lifts. Councillor Williams.
Thank you. So this just report is regarding two sets of lifts, one at Bounds Green Court and the other one at Woodmead. And the current lifts within the programme have just reached the end of their useful life and replacement parts are becoming obsolete. So the modernisation of the lifts will ensure that they comply with current lift standards and will provide our resident and visitors with a reliable and efficient service when travelling the building. So they can go up and down in the lift, which is sort of essential to living in a block of flats. So I hope you'll approve this award of contract. Thank you.
Just to add as well, we will come back to resolution after the exempt information. But if we look at page 116, where we're asked the recommendation 3.1, 3.4, it says for Cabinet to note, that's actually for Cabinet to approve. So if we can just know that, it's asking us to approve, not to note the total project costs there, which we'll come back to after the exempt item. Any questions on the open part of the item report? Sorry. No. Okay, Councillor Emery.
Thank you, Chair. What penalties are in the contract if the work overruns? 4.4 says that contractor A showed a good understanding of how to add social value for residents. Just give an example. Just wonder if you could give an example on how a company installing a lift can add social value. Just a little bit of confusion on that one. And then thirdly, are leasehold costs still being split equally regardless of the floor that a resident lives on?
For the two technical points, I'll get Christian's online with those. But on the social value, we ask that all our contracts provide social value. So that does vary what it is. It also has a baseline about local supply chain use, also number of apprentices within the company, that sort of thing. But more specifically, quite often a company that's working in specific blocks or estates will provide services to the sort of community centre. That could include laptops, it could include skills advice, jobs application advice. It could involve going to talk to local schools about getting into businesses, all kinds of stuff. So we do really make quite high expectations of all our contracts that they provide social value. But Christian online, could you comment on the point of, I would hope we don't charge people different amounts on different floors, but and also, what was the first point?
What penalties are... Sorry, Christian.
Oh, penalty for being late. Yeah.
Yeah,
late.
sorry, councillors. First one is it is a fixed price and there will be a retention element, so there won't necessarily be a penalty, but they won't get paid until they've completed the work, and we do keep a retention should there be any defects in the following the operation of the lift. And secondly, an apportionment will be a standard apportionment, yes, depending on the number of leaseholders. So it's just under £218,000 apportioned amongst 22 leaseholders.
Okay, thank you. We will return to the resolutions after considering the exempt information at item 21. If we can move to item 14, which is agency staff contract award. Councillor Carlin.
Thank you, Leader. Haringey Council is committed to building a motivated, collaborative and community-focused workforce. In any organisation of our size, there will be circumstances that necessitate the employment of agency workers, but this is not the Council's preferred mode of employment. Agency workers should be engaged where there is a strong business need, which will primarily be to help facilitate shorter-term or finite projects and to address unavoidable skill shortages in order to maintain services to residents. All directorates are working to ensure there's a solid reason for every agency assignment and that no new agency workers are recruited without prior consideration of all alternative options. There are strong management and monitoring mechanisms in place to challenge the engagement of new agency workers and to monitor spend, which will be further enhanced. The measures taken over the past year have decreased the numbers and level of expenditure on agency workers. The latest figures are that as a rolling annual spend, our latest figure is between £37 and £39 million annually. That is down from over £45 million in the year 23 to 24. So as we can see, there is a considerable reduction in agency worker spend given as a result of the measures that we've been putting in place over the past year. This new contract represents the best value way to engage agency workers, and it is important to note there's no minimum spend and no penalties or increased costs if the Council does not spend up to the authorised contract value, and we will be continuing to push those figures down. The Council values the hard work of all our current agency staff and hopes that where possible these workers will join us on a permanent basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carlin. Any questions from the Cabinet? Okay, Councillor Emery.
Only 2 questions for this one. 2.4 notes a hope that where possible agency staff will join the organisation on a permanent basis. What's being done across the organisation to encourage this? And then the second question, in October 2023, the Council had to vary the value of the current contract by 20 million in order to sustain the supply of the agency staff. And then 8 months later, in June 2024, came back to vary the contract by a further 32.5 million. Given in previous years we spent more than 40 million on agency staff, and inflation is widely expected to remain quite sticky, are you confident that you will not need to come back and vary this contract again?
All directors, where the reason for the agency staff has been for the recruitment of agency staff has been because we have found it difficult to procure, not to procure, but to recruit permanent members of staff. Discussions are held with those agency workers to actually encourage them to become permanent workers of the Council. Unfortunately, not all agency workers wish to become permanent employees, and in specific, there are specifically difficult areas of the Council where we have difficulty in recruiting permanent members of staff, and in those areas, quite often the agency workers that we have do not want to work for us on a permanent basis. So we do whatever we can in the circumstances. In terms of varying the contract, as I've noted earlier, we have reduced the spend on the contract down to a rolling amount currently of between 37 and 39 million pounds a year. We are continuing to do all the necessary work to drive those figures lower. We can't guarantee that we won't come back, but we are hopeful that given the trajectory, we will be successful in holding to the maximum on the amount in this contract. Thank you.
Thank you. So if we can agree the resolutions as set out in 3.1 to 3.4 of the report, and this is contained on page 121 of the agenda, do we all agree? Agreed. Thank you. Item 15, which is the approval to consult on a new housing allocations policy. Councillor Williams.
Thank you. So we all want fairer housing in Haringey. The housing crisis has pushed thousands of families into homelessness. Additionally, we have 13,000 families on our waiting list for a council home. And Haringey is also one of the biggest council house building programmes in London, building hundreds of new social homes for local people every year. We've just celebrated the milestone of 700 new homes. We want the allocation of these homes to be as fair as possible, making sure that homes go to those in the greatest need. And that's why we've been engaging with residents over the last year on some changes to the current allocation rules, and we are now going to go to a formal public consultation. Our ambition is to give greater priority to local children, especially children with additional needs, medical needs and life-threatening situations. And this will be a real step towards fairer housing in our borough. And when the consultation goes live, I would ask that everybody shares it as widely as possible, because we really do want to get as many views on this as possible. Thank you.
Any questions from the Cabinet? Okay, Councillor Emery.
Yeah, 3 questions on this one. Firstly, how do you expect the changes in incomes and savings thresholds to impact the number of households on the waiting list? Secondly, what's the thought process in setting the maximum age difference of 25 years for adults sharing a room? Is there any difference between a 30 and a 50-year-old sharing a room and a 30 and a 60-year-old sharing a room? And then the final question, 6.76, states that the council will only contact tenants by letter to complete the consultation if they are in priority bands A or B and the council has no email address for them. Given the high possibility of people not opening emails, can you undertake to contact letters at all can you undertake to contact all tenants by letter, considering this?
I think, Hannah, if you want to come up and answer some more of the specific things, I think we're going to contact them by many means. A letter is just one of them. Quite a lot of, we have information about texting, there's all kinds of sort of ways, but Hannah can give some more detail on that. The amount of impact of those changes on the waiting list is something that the team have looked at, so I'm sure Hannah can update you on that. Adult sharing, I mean, that's a very tiny little bit of this consultation, to be honest, and that will be something that we seek views on very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. So, Hannah Adler, Head of Housing Strategy and Policy. On the just to take the last point Councillor Williams raised about the age differential on sharing rooms, as Councillor Williams said, that's something that we are consulting on. So we'll take views from the consultation and take those on board in the final allocations policy. On contacting people by letter or email, one of the reasons we've suggested in the Cabinet report to not contact certain households, the circumstances in which we will contact people by kind of dedicated letter where we don't have an email address is partly based on the sheer number of households on the housing register and the cost of writing to every single one of those households. And so we focused the letter writing to the bands which are most affected by the housing allocations policy. And there was a last question that has now slipped my mind. If you just jog my memory.
Yeah, that was to do with the impact of the changes to income and saving thresholds and how that will impact or reduce the amount of people on the waiting list.
So it probably, I mean, there will be an impact on the number of people on the housing register, but the main rationale around the income and savings thresholds changing is to ensure that the households who are on the housing register are the households who are most in need of low-cost housing in Haringey.
It brings it into line with government thresholds on the other benefits and things,
that's
doesn't
right.
it? Yeah.
Okay, and as has been said, there'll be an opportunity through the consultation process to feed through some of these views as well. Okay, so if we can move to agree the resolutions on this as set out in 3.1 to 3.4 of the report, and this is on page 134 of the agenda. Do we all agree? Agree. Thank you. Item 16, which is the minutes of other bodies. Can we please note the minutes of Cabinet member sign-ins from pages 229 to 244, and can we also note the minutes of other bodies? Item 17, significant and delegated actions. Can we please note the delegated decisions taken by directors on pages 245 to 248. 18, new items of urgent business. There are no new items of urgent business. So if I can move to item 19, which is the exclusion of the press and public. So items 20 and 21 allow for consideration of exempt information in relation to items 9 and 13. Can I move that the press and public be excluded from the remainder of the meeting to consider this exempt information as defined under paragraphs 3 and 5, part 1, section 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. Do we all agree? Okay, so I'm formally closing the public section of the meeting.